Hello, I'm Lisi Barella, VP of SMB Sales, and I'm excited to welcome you to the Mom Project's Blaze Your Own Path workshop series. We tailored these sessions to the topics our team has heard you share interest in to ensure you hear rich and beneficial insights to advance your business. The sessions we cover are all grounded in research published by the Mom Project's Research and Insights Division Work Labs. Our team is honored to have several of our partners join in these discussions to provide insightful perspectives and practical applications. We hope you enjoy our third installment and look forward to our ongoing collaboration.
Hi, everyone. I'm Adrienne Young with Work Labs for the Research and Insights Division of the Mom Project. And today we are so excited to be joined by our own talent savant from the Mom Project, Talent Acquisition Manager, Julie Lorenzo. Julie brings more than 6 years of talent specialization from her backgrounds in HR and TA. And we're going to be talking about how to prioritize inclusive hiring practices because it's just an essential part of organizations for future work and for current work. And we're going to be particularly focused on some of the things that can be influential for small and mid-sized businesses because of the greater freedom and flex in the process that you all use. So let's dive into the benefits that we have around it that can kind of come from how you recruit and evaluate and consider prospective talent in a more inclusive way. But honestly, the biggest motivation for this approach is that it's just simply the right thing to do. So Julie, let's start by acknowledging some of the shifts in the talent landscape that we've really seen. And this slide here is representing 3 core groups that make up a huge portion of our TMP talent community. And that's returners, pivoters, and what we're classifying and pointing as stars. Returners are those that have taken a caregiving break for their families and are making their way back to the paid workforce. Pivoters are represented by our RISE nonprofit arm, and those that are getting skills specializations and specific tracks and kind of doing that gritty work of digging in to create economic opportunities for themselves that may be in a new field. And then the last is stars. Those are skilled through alternative routes. So what other ways besides traditional 4-year degrees are they bringing skills to the table? Julie, can you share your perspective on some of the talent trends and points of view you've seen over the past 2 years?
Absolutely. So it's safe to say that we've seen a tremendous shift resulting not only from COVID, but also from the recent wave of layoffs. So people appear to be using these unplanned career pauses as a time to reset and reevaluate what it is that they want from their career. And they're taking advantage of this extra time that they find themselves having and enrolling in boot camps or other specialized intensive courses, taking classes from platforms like Coursera and Udemy, which have definitely grown in popularity as a result of COVID, and pursuing certifications like the ones that we offer through RISE. And by taking advantage of these different options, we're finding that candidates are able to put themselves in a better position when the time comes for them to return or make that pivot, and that they're excited and they're motivated and that they're armed with really cutting edge knowledge and skills because they've just recently sort of brushed up on those things.
Yeah, I mean, MOOCs and programs like RISE are really offering real-time access to learning as needed. So as the market opens up new opportunities and new fields and new technology requirements, then talent can be as responsive as real-time in getting those skills under their belt. So I think it's an incredible thing. I'm going to move to the next slide because conceiving of the idea of inclusive hiring as part of, oh, I'm sorry, that's the wrong slide. Sorry, guys. Yep. Shoot, sorry. Let me just give a pause for a second. Okay. It's important to remember that better inclusive hiring means better diverse representation inside of your organization. And when we think about inclusive hiring as part of a larger mix of our DEI priorities and of our DEI programming, it can be really helpful to recall and remember and retain that we are talking about profoundly valuable outcomes for our organizations. So as we started, it's just the right thing to do, and it's important movement to have DEI be integral and in the foreground of your organization. But also when we draw on work lab studies that really utilize predictive analytics, we can see how beneficial it is for the employees in your organization and also for your organizational outcomes. So this is drawn from our meaningful and measurable DE&I study that Work Labs did. And this is showing a model of what are the components around DE&I that ladder up to a level of satisfaction in our employee experience of DE&I, and then also how that connects and links back to performance. So this is one of the most profound outcomes we see, which are 57% higher rates of retention, 51% higher likelihood to recommend the organization, 39% lift in productivity by talent, and 31% greater belonging and sense of belonging within their organization. So as we think about inclusive hiring as part of one of the tenets of a larger DE&I strategy, it really helps to ground in the idea that it is impactful for the employee experience, and it's also impactful for the organization. Okay, now if we can look at, and what does the talent individually bring to the table? So I'll go to the other slide. It's important to note that also there are values distinct to moms that are within our talent community as well. This is the tenacity, moms, dads, and allies. And advocates. So the talent themselves are really bringing forward a distinct value that we aren't seeing in peer hires as reported by hiring organizations that have brought our talent in. So we see lifts in retention, again, productivity, and contributions to the culture that when they're on board. So the idea that what we're doing in inclusive hiring is something that's additive and contributive to our organization can help us as we work through some of the needs and some of the ways or the practices that we can incorporate in our process. Julie, in your conversations with moms returning from a break or pivoting into a new field or pursuing skills again, like through certification programs, what strikes you as meaningful or compelling for others to understand?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that these moms are driven, they're ambitious, they're eager, they're determined, and they're ready to deliver. And what they're missing oftentimes is the opportunity. So, what we really need is for companies and hiring managers to just, consider these candidates and all of the values that you've just mentioned that they bring to the table and really give them that opportunity to shine.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so now we're going to look at how can we actually do the work of being more inclusive for this amazing pool of contributors. It's always nice to start there. So these are not just accommodations, but these are pathways to grow and really extend the amount of talent that we get to see, that we get to bring into our organizations to contribute some of those statistics that we just looked at on our business. So based on our research, one of the most important things that organizations can do to expand their inclusive hiring approach is to focus on character traits, to look at goal alignment and the skills themselves, instead of looking for candidates that just meet specific degree or hiring credentials, or criteria, and really looking at the skills and the lived experience and what that does to help someone bring forward some of the additive qualities that we just looked at on those stats into the organization. It can be helpful to reflect on what types of employees thrive in this specific kind of role. Or when I evaluate and look at my team, who is it that really shines and what are the traits of that individual? So what kind of person and not just what kind of resume? When we design and kind of integrate a hiring process that goes beyond the resume, we really get to the essential part of how we start the process of greater inclusivity in our hiring. That also allows us to kind of lift some of those biases and allows the candidates to get equal footing. So it's not just, again, about what's on paper, but also what's motivating their interest in the role and what's motivating and compelling them towards your organization. Julie, can you share any tips or steps that you use when you're, say, partnering with hiring managers to create opportunities for all candidates to be able to shine and show the skills and reasons that maybe transcend the page of the resume?
Absolutely. I think it starts with the job posting itself. So yes, there are absolutely some roles where a particular degree or certification is necessary, right? An accountant or an engineer, but many positions don't require a specific degree or even a degree at all. And so and I've also been in organizations where the hiring manager feels that it's essential that a candidate have served or been in that industry before or have held that title previously. Both of these, perceived job requirements really sort of can end up limiting the candidate pool and limiting the diversity of your candidates and ultimately your hires. And so, the way I like to think of it is the reality is a new employee can be brought up to speed quickly on a new system or a new industry, but there are skills and traits that are harder to teach, but which, prove to be incredibly valuable to an organization and often impact how successful the person is in the role, even more than those technical skills. So, for example, some of the harder to teach skills would be something like curiosity or the ability to influence others, the ability to build and maintain effective relationships, to think critically, to be action oriented. I know for us here at the Mom Project, we've identified some competencies and values that we know are key to being successful in our organization, right? So we're a startup. And so that means that we are often shifting and we're adapting to changing market conditions. And so we need employees that are able to pivot easily, that don't get frustrated when, things blow up and don't go as planned. We're customer obsessed, and hopefully people watching this have seen evidence of that. But that means that we expect our employees to know what our customers need even before they do. And so that means that we, want people that are really, motivated to deliver to our customers. And we value innovation, right? We're a startup. And so we want to hire employees who are curious, who think outside the box, who aren't afraid to bring new ideas to the table. And so to that end, we've built our own recruiting process to assess not only their technical abilities, but even more so their ability or experience in demonstrating those competencies and values that we see as necessary. And then more specifically, I work with the hiring managers to devise an interview guide for each role. And that interview guide includes who will be a part of the interview panel. And so that, brings diversity to our panel. And also what specific questions will be asked at each stage of the process. And this ensures that we're being very thoughtful about the questions that we're asking, and we're getting a broader picture of the candidate and their experience. And looking again beyond the resume to see, do they have those skills and abilities and attributes that will allow them to be successful and thrive in this role, right? Because we want everyone that we bring on board to be set up for success here at the Mom Project. So I was thinking it might be helpful to use an example. So I had a recruiting coordinator role open, and there was a candidate who was coming from a job in banking, and she didn't have any HR or recruiting experience. And so many times a candidate like this would just immediately be dispositioned as, not right. But so if we're trying to change the way we're looking at this, I looked at her and I said, this person works in a bank, so she's probably had to do a lot of customer service and deal with some customers that were maybe panicky or angry, right? Just people are very sensitive around their money, understandably. And I also thought, okay, she was responsible for managing money, right? And that's a very detail-oriented responsibility. So these are some of the things that I knew I would need, that the individual would need to be successful. And what's more, she was a graduate of our RISE program. And so I knew that meant that likely she was very, very driven. She was very eager to learn. And again, these are some of the characteristics that we've said are necessary for success here at the Mom Project. And so as we went through the interview process, the team and the interview panel asked questions that did address those key competencies and values, and her responses demonstrated that she was, in fact, the best candidate for the role, beating out other candidates that on paper looked like a better fit because they had held that role previously, or they had, an HR or recruiting background. And in the end, this employee, was able to perform the job with ease. She kind of went above and beyond. She was establishing processes. People loved engaging with her because she brought a great spirit, a great vibe to the team. And so I think that's a great example of, she had those transferable skills. And I just looked beyond the lack of HR, recruiting, or industry experience. And she proved to be just such a great and valuable addition to the team.
That's a wonderful example, Julie. Thank you for sharing that, because it also touches on some of the other things we saw in kind of our research around this, which is the more we can take a holistic view around the candidate that's beyond the page, the more we consider the aspects of their life that are actually influencing the way that they are, and the more we make that parallel to the types of roles and works they'll be doing, the greater ease we have in maybe considering someone that goes outside the bounds of what we would say is in the job listing, that we really then can tap into the attributes of the human and the person that is in the process. One thing that I wanted to say is we heard again and again about this dis-ease around the idea of the pivoter. And you kind of touched on this with someone coming from banking and going into a completely different field. But what stands out is how you recognize and acknowledge something like what we value at the Mom Project is kind of that entrepreneurial spirit. And what better reflection of that than someone that's willing to pivot and use tenacity and grit to get new certifications and new skills to pursue a new opportunity in a new field. That's the very crux of an entrepreneurial spirit. So if that is what we know fundamentally works well within the context of our culture, then being able to draw that out from the human experience and interaction is kind of a gold mine. And what is a great opportunity for small and mid-sized businesses that maybe elude enterprise or larger scale is there's a lot of default to an ATS screening out employees that we maybe, or prospects, I guess, prospective talent, that we maybe never get the opportunity to hear that full picture view because we don't get the dialogue with the talent, and where mid and small size businesses can go in and actually have the face time to understand or use a TA partner to do the screening that tells the story. You spoke about one other thing, and then I'll move on to our next point, but that's also about not having a homogenous blend of types inside our organization. Also allows us to have innovative thinkers, also allows us to have critical thinkers and resourceful contributors like caregivers, like parents and moms. They're always there to pinch hit and solve problems and really relegate what's most important at what time. And those are the kinds of things that we miss when we just use that screen out approach of paper through an ATS. So thank you for giving that example in real time. That's perfect. Another thing we heard, and often this is because some that fall into these sub-talent groups are overlooked. Another thing we heard that was tremendously beneficial is the idea that there's heightened transparency in the process, in the hiring process, and that being a great way to maybe expand how inclusive we are in the approach we use with talent. And what was communicated specifically from the prospective talent that we spoke to is things like sharing what kinds of questions might be asked or who would be involved in the process or exactly how many rounds. The more heightened the talent felt like they understood what's expected, what the process is going to include, the greater performance and confidence they had going into that equation. So do you mind really sharing maybe some tips and tricks around that, how you can prepare talent to succeed and how we all can maybe approach looking at the way that they're able to bring their best forward instead of looking at it as a hazing process of seeing who we can rule out? Can you share?
So I really in each step of the process, I let the candidate know who they're going to be speaking with. What is their title? Oftentimes I'll even include their LinkedIn profile so they can kind of go and learn a little bit more about them. And then I tell them what kind of an interview is it? Is it a phone screen? Is it a video interview? Is it a panel interview? Is it an assessment style interview? In the case of engineering, where they're going to maybe have to do some real-time problem solving or demonstration of skills. And then I also provide a timeline for when they'll hear back from us. And so if there's a delay, I do try my best to say there's a no update, so they know I haven't been ghosted. It's still a work in progress, and they aren't left wondering where things stand. So I think it's just being transparent and keeping them in the loop along the way, so they feel like they understand where things stand.
The thoughtfulness of just even communicating that there isn't an update is huge. We hear from the conversations we have with talent a lot of times that immediate confidence hit comes when I'm not sure and I'm kind of left in the dark, and immediate confidence boost when someone even just says the words, "I've passed along," or I wanted you to know this is next. That feels like they're being considered and weighted equally to the other candidates in the pool. And to that point, the next question I have really relates to how do you foster kind of an open communication around this idea that we want the process to be fair and equitable, and we want all talent to be equally represented? How do you kind of foster and steward that along the way so we don't lose sight of that when we get to the final stages where the hiring manager is really in that decision set? Can you share any examples of how teams can work together to get that right?
Yeah. So I'll share sort of how I operate. And I personally like to have a kickoff meeting before with the hiring manager before the role is even posted. And during that call, I'm going to ask questions to understand not only the requirements of the role, right? So yes, there are some specific job requirements, but also, again, what are those skills and attributes that are going to drive success for the role? So I like to ask questions like, what problem is this role solving for? If this is a backfill, what made the prior individual successful or not as successful in the role? What are your top 2 to 3 non-negotiable attributes? When you think about the most successful people on your team, what are the traits, the skills, the attributes that they demonstrate? And on the flip side is, what do you think is lacking on your team? What are some of the skills that you think your team needs to really be a more comprehensive and successful team? And more often than not, when they talk about those non-negotiable attributes and the factors and traits of successful team members, technical abilities don't even come up, right? Instead, they're going to talk about how they need someone who shows initiative and is able to deliver with very little oversight, or they need someone that's able to effectively influence stakeholders. And so by having this conversation at the very start of the process, I'm heading off some of the bias that might plague the process later. And then during my screening calls with those candidates that I decide that I want to speak with, I assessed them based upon, again, using that interview kit, I assess them based upon the questions that are really intended to get to some of those softer skills or attributes. And then I really provide the detail of their responses in the notes to the hiring manager. So then when I send it over to the hiring manager, they have the resume, but they also have the notes. And I've found that, really more often than not, my hiring managers are extremely pleased with the candidates that I put forward, even if on paper they might not have been who they thought they wanted in the beginning. So I think that has proven to work really well for me.
That's excellent. And that's such a testament to their capacity to trust you as a filtering and screening arm or an extension of them in the process. And being able to, like you said, up front, we heard from hiring managers again and again, when up front we kind of determined the criteria, then when I get tethered back to it as the arbiter for my decision making, it really does help eliminate those biases that have me regress and just consider, again, the tactical skills listings on the resume, but instead really think about the whole person. So thank you for giving that example. That's fantastic. Another thing that came up, and you had touched on this as well, is that hiring managers were saying that the timing for when candidates were presented also had a huge factor. So I would just encourage anyone that's on this call that's in the role of kind of curating and putting forth the list of talent that you want to recommend to a hiring manager, do it in a fair and equitable way. Don't kind of have the reservation of not putting forth that candidate that you're not sure about that was really great but doesn't meet that one criteria. Go ahead and put them forth first, because it influenced the hiring manager's perception. The confidence of the TA influenced the hiring manager's perception of how valuable and viable the candidate is. So thank you for sharing that that's what you do and how you do it, Julie.
And I'd love to actually, that brings up a good point. So there's definitely some instances where there's a candidate where maybe I'm on the fence for them, right? Maybe I'm like, okay, these are not like a hard yes for me, but I'm not really sure, and so I will often put those candidates forward to the hiring manager as well for that second opinion, so that if I have unintentionally had any bias, or if I'm allowing any bias to seep into my process, that I'm giving that candidate sort of, they had enough. If they've got 90% of what the hiring manager is looking for, I'm going to let the hiring manager sort of make that call. And I don't want to waste the hiring manager's time. So I'm not going to put somebody forward that maybe only has very minimal or, really probably wouldn't be successful. But if I'm sort of on the fence for them, I will absolutely do that. And sometimes, probably actually most of the time, the hiring manager ends up coming back and confirming whatever my hesitations were. And I'll usually tell sometimes I'll tell the hiring manager, this is where I'd like you to dig in, right? I don't want to paint the picture for them ahead of time, but this is where maybe we need to dig in a little bit more, because this is why I'm uncertain about this candidate. And so again, a lot of the time they come back and they're like, no, I got the same vibe that you did, and no, this candidate isn't right. But at least we know that that we really did try to reduce all the bias in the process.
That you have a safeguard for yourself is also really conscientious. That's a wonderful mechanism to just bake into the process versus candidate to candidate trying to decide whether or not I am bringing bias to the table. Just have a safeguard. Just have it operationalized in the process and have an agreement up front. Again, that arbiter up front of who and how we'll evaluate is a wonderful thing to thread through the entire process and just be systematic. This is how we do it. So thank you for sharing that. I know what we're going to get asked because it gets asked all the time by respondents or by participants of these types of workshops and seminars and webinars is, what are some examples, Julie? What are some best practice examples that we see? And I will say that one of the easiest ways in partnering with the Mom Project to be really inclusive is the idea of a returnship. And we talked about this talent group at the beginning, but we have a large representation of returners, which again is just anyone who's taken a career break or a paid working career break to provide caregiving support. So they're working their way back into the paid workforce. And because we historically, and it's gotten so much better. I mean, I think we can both speak to the fact that now we're getting actually solicited for returners because the recognition of the values that they bring are highly valuable to the organization. But historically, this was maybe an overlooked population, and sometimes still can be because they don't have continuity of paid employment. So can you talk a little bit about around some advice that you'd give for organizations that are maybe considering a returner or returnship program, and what are the special nuances for returners?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that companies understand that it is a mutually beneficial relationship or situation, right? So they're beneficial for candidates because they build a bridge. They allow those candidates to return to the workforce, update any skills they have or enhance their skills. But then the employer benefits because it allows them to tap into a diverse talent pool, right? With varying types of backgrounds and experiences. And it does it, and it allows them to fill sort of a workforce gap or meet a specific need, such as to support a particular project or initiative. It's also relatively risk-free, right? So they can bring a resource in, evaluate them, and really see, is this a good candidate for our organization before committing to them full-time? And so for example, again, I'm going to use another example because I think it's helpful.
Please.
So, for example, let's say a company wants to bring someone in to assist during open enrollment season, and they need someone that's going to come in and, do some data entry, answer any questions that employees might have, follow up with employees that maybe haven't completed their paperwork. And so this is great because this would be a great position for someone that maybe was in an administrative role and really wants to get into HR, right? So this is going to give them an opportunity to get back into the workforce. It's going to give them a chance to brush up on their skills. It's going to expose them to the benefits facet of HR. And then it's going to give the company, one, the resource that they need to get through that very stressful and very busy season. But also, in the end, they may say, this is a great employee. This person is, really doing an exceptional job. We either have another, we can extend this returnship, or we can offer them a permanent role. And because we know this person can deliver and we know they're a great addition to our team. So I think that's, it's important to look at it that way. It's just a great way to really have a win-win.
I think that's a perfect example because when we talk about returners, we're talking about seasoned professionals. The composition of returner talent that we have at TMP is on average, 7 to 10 years 7 to 10 years of professional experience on board. So they're bringing that to an organization. Additionally, because they have often been overlooked, we do hear from hiring managers again and again that these are the hires that dig in to prove themselves, right? They're there as a point of validation for themselves, for their families, and to the organization that's giving them the opportunity or that on-ramp back in. And Julie, like you mentioned, the variation in the length of those kinds of programs from a 6-week, an 8-week, a 10-week, that is a dual trial for both parties. And what we see in the data is the outcomes on returnships is on average 80% convert to full-time hires, which is a wonderful bar to be setting for something like trialing. If you get an 80% role conversion into a full-time role, then that's a low risk way to, again, expand the way that you have inclusive hiring in your organization.
So I didn't even realize the statistics were that high. That's great. That's
yeah, exactly. And we also see higher levels of empathy, higher levels of communication, higher levels of contribution to culture add. We also see a lot of things that, because they're caregivers, that they're bringing to the whole team. So not just to the role, but they're also leveling up the way that culture norms are experienced for everyone on the team. So it's a great way to make movement towards inclusive hiring as we think about returners again as an easy start, because we're talking about people that again are veteran professionals who have skills to bring and want to prove themselves. They want to contribute to organizations. Now, the next thing I'll say, to be, again, conscientious of our viewers, Julie, is that they'll ask us about practical, tactical, and what are some steps that we could try. And if we just want to like take a step one towards this idea of expanding our inclusive hiring practices, where should we start? What could we do? What small thing could we do today?
Absolutely. I recommend first and foremost starting with assessing the job posting. See if there are any requirements such as a particular degree or industry experience that aren't truly necessary and may actually be negatively impacting the diversity of the candidates who are applying to the role. And instead, focus on the softer or transferable skills that'll drive success in the role and at the organization, and create bullets that are going to address those skills. And also, if your company has a DEI statement, be sure to include that in your job posting, because that demonstrates commitment to DEI, which is something that, you know, many candidates are really actively seeking from an employer. And then next, I'd working to create those standardized interview kits, right? Where there's a scorecard where every interview is going to be asking the exact same question to every candidate. And that way, each candidate is given the equal opportunity to showcase their skills, and it does reduce bias that way.
That's great. Thank you so much for giving, again, the practical ways and starting at the idea that you have set standardized questions, and really, again, having objectivity in the way that you're reviewing can help, you know, kind of curb those biases that can sneak in. So thank you for giving that example. I also just want to say,
I was going to say, there's also the, you know, if you're looking to build a more diverse candidate pool, the Mom Project can offer that, right?
Mom Project, that's right.
We can help with that.
I've heard that they have wonderful talent and wonderful teams to help support organizations. So thank you for that, Julie. Yeah. And I will say another thing about inclusive hiring practices is if you've asserted a gender parity goal, or if you have put forth, as Julie just said, to mention your DE&I goals, inclusive hiring and expanding the way that and who we're considering and how we're considering them is kind of tethered. They're connected to each other. We're going to have to be able to expand who we're considering, because we have disproportionately impacted women in the workforce into these relegated buckets that now we have to find pathways back. And returnship, as an example, is a wonderful pathway back to the paid workforce, because there was a heavy tilt of women caregivers that had to leave the workforce. So now penalizing them by overlooking them as viable talents that we could onboard is working against our larger goal around greater, more equitable organizations. So, Julie, thank you for sharing your expertise. Thank you for sharing the living examples, and thank you all for attending today. Organizations have so much to gain by prioritizing diversity, equity, inclusion in their hiring practices. And as Julie said, the Mom Project represents a massive talent pool of wonderful contributors that are eager and looking forward to find roles within organizations that are like-minded and understand those priorities. So thank you again all for coming, and I'll kick it over to Lacey.
Thank you for joining our third session. You'll receive an email with a summary of the research study we discussed today, as well as a recap of the entire series. We look forward to seeing you at our final session next.